Tonight, we travel to a quiet forest glade in ancient Greece. The sun dapples through leaves, scenting the air with warm pine resin, moss, and the clean rush of spring water. But beneath the peace lies a story, a sombre warning about boundaries of fate and the dangers of curiosity. This is the story of Actaeon, and it begins with footsteps. Before we begin, please comment where you are and what time it is so we can see who's joining us from around the world. It's fascinating to discover where you're tuning in from. Now close your eyes, sink into the covers, take a deep breath and release it, relaxing your face, shoulders, and the rest of your body. Let your thoughts slow, and let this very sombre tale carry you gently into slumber. Picture yourself in a time when God still walked among mortals, when every stream held potential for divine encounter, and when a simple mistake could change not just a life, but a legend. You're in that quiet forest glade in ancient Greece, where birds murmur in the trees and a waterfall sings softly to itself over stone. But this is not just any forest. This is Cithaeron, the sacred mountain where gods once walked freely among mortals, where every stream holds memories of divine footsteps, and where the very air still whispers with ancient power. The forest here remembers everything, every prayer, every transgression, every transformation. It remembers the day when a young hunter learned too late that some boundaries are not meant to be crossed, even by accident. Here, even now, the branches lean closer when this tale is told. The leaves tremble not just from wind, but from memory. For this is the story of Actaeon, a tale of fate's cruel precision, of divine justice, and of the thin line between reverence and transgression. Actaeon was more than just a hunter. He was the grandson of Cadmus, founder of Thebes, born into a family where divine blood already ran thin but potent in their veins. His mother, Autonoa, had taught him from childhood to respect the gods' domains, to pour libations before every hunt, to never take more than needed from the forest's bounty. His teacher was Chiron himself, the wisest of centaurs, who had trained heroes like Achilles and Jason, who had taught him not just the ways of the bow and spear, but also the secret languages of stars and seasons. By his 20th summer, Actaeon could read the forest like others read scrolls. He knew the difference between a deer's sleeping print and its running track, could tell by the bend of a blade of grass how long ago a boar had passed. His arrows flew true, not through magic or divine favour, but through years of patient practice, of learning to breathe with the wind, to think like his prey, to move like a shadow among shadows. His hounds were not mere hunting dogs. Each had a name, a story, a unique gift. There was swift Melampus with his black paws who could outrun the north wind. Ichnobates, the trail finder, who could follow a scent 3 days old through running water. Pamphagos, whose deep bay could freeze a charging boar in its tracks. Each dog had been raised from a pup, fed from Actaeon's own hand, trained with gentle words and patient hours, until they moved as one being in the chase. Some said his skill made him proud, that success had made him careless of the god's dominion. But those who knew him best saw differently, saw how he would stop to help a wounded fawn, how he never killed a nursing mother, how he always left offerings at the small shrines scattered through the woods. He was reverent in his own way, though perhaps too comfortable in the wild places where mortals were meant to tread lightly. On that fateful day, he had risen before dawn, as was his custom. He had poured honey wine on his household altar, whispered prayers to Apollo for clear sight, and to Artemis herself for fair hunting. His quiver was full, but not heavy. He never took more arrows than he needed, a habit that spoke of confidence some mistook for arrogance. His hunting chiton was worn soft with use, dyed the deep green-brown of forest shadows. A single eagle's feather was tucked into his headband, not as decoration, but as a reminder to keep his pride in check, for even eagles must return to earth. The morning had been good, too good, perhaps. His party had brought down 2 fine stags before the sun reached its height. It was the kind of success that should have signalled time to head home, to celebrate moderately, to quit while the gods' favour held. But the day was perfect for hunting, that rare combination of cool air and warm sun that makes every scent stand out sharp and clear. And so, when his companions turned back toward Thebes with their prizes, Actaeon waved them on, saying he would follow soon. He wanted just a little longer in his beloved woods, just a few more hours of solitude with his dogs and the whispering trees. It was a choice that would echo through centuries. The heat of midday had begun to press down through the canopy when Actaeon first noticed the change in the air. The forest had shifted somehow, the way it does when something ancient stirs within its depths. The birds had fallen silent, not in fear, but in reverence. Even his dogs, usually ranging far ahead, had drawn closer, their steps uncertain on ground that suddenly felt too sacred for mortal pause. The mist came first, not the usual afternoon haze, but something crystalline and sweet-scented, carrying notes of night-blooming flowers that shouldn't bloom in daylight. Silver droplets clung to spider webs that hadn't been there moments before, each one catching light like a fallen star. The very air tasted of moonlight, though the sun still rode high. Actaeon knew these signs, every hunter did. These were the markers of divine presence, the whispered warnings that mortals should turn back, should avert their eyes, should remember their place in the order of things. Later he would remember his mother's words, "The gods give us signs before they give us consequences." But the path ahead drew him forward like a thread pulling at his chest. The sound of falling water played tricks with his senses, sometimes seeming distant, sometimes feeling so close he could almost feel it spray on his face. The vegetation grew thicker, more lush than it should be in the height of summer. Flowers bloomed that shouldn't grow together. Winter hellebore beside summer roses, autumn crocuses tangled with spring violets. Time itself seemed to bend in this place. His dogs whined softly, pressing against his legs. Even brave Melampus, who had faced down lions, seemed reluctant to proceed. But Actaeon was caught in that strange spell that sometimes takes hold of mortals in divine places, a mixture of awe and curiosity that overrides wisdom. The veil of hanging vines before him swayed without wind. Beyond them the sound of water became clearer, not just falling, but also the gentle splash of movement within a pool. And voices. No, not voices exactly, but sounds that reminded him of voices, the way starlight reminds us of song. He should have turned back. He should have listened to the trembling in his hands, the tightness in his chest that warned him. He stood on the threshold of something beyond his mortal right to witness. He should have remembered that Artemis, virgin goddess of the hunt, keeper of wild places, protector of young things, was known to seek secluded pools in the hottest part of the day. Instead, he pushed aside the curtain of vines. The glade beyond existed in a different kind of light, silver and gold together, as if sun and moon shared the sky. The pool was black as night, but scattered starlight across its surface even in full day. Steam rose from it in twisting columns that took almost shapes. Running deer, flying birds, dancing nymphs that dissolved back to mist before the eye could fix upon them. And there, in the heart of the pool, was Artemis. Those who say the goddess was simply bathing understand nothing. She was in communion with her own divine nature, her power unleashed in the one place she thought herself unwatched. Her dark hair floated on the water like spilled ink, adorned with small flames that burned but did not consume. Her skin held the same light as the moon she commanded. The water around her moved with purpose, forming and reforming, telling stories of the hunt, of birth, of death, of the wild places and wild things under her protection. She was magnificent. She was terrible. She was never meant for mortal eyes. For a moment, one eternal moment, Actaeon stood transfixed, not by her beauty, though that was beyond mortal description, but by the suddenly crushing recognition of his own mortality. He saw himself as she would see him, a brief flicker of life, a temporary arrangement of dust and desire, presuming to witness the intimate solitude of an eternal being. When she turned, her eyes held neither rage nor surprise. They held something far worse. They held the weight of consequence itself. They held the price that must be paid when boundaries are breached, when the sacred is glimpsed by the profane, when the eternal is interrupted by the ephemeral. Those eyes met his, and Actaeon understood what it means to be seen, truly seen, by divinity. It was like being struck by lightning while drowning, like falling upward into a star. Every moment of his life, every choice, every prayer, every proud thought and humble deed lay exposed before that gaze. Her voice, when it came, was not cruel. That was almost the worst part. It held something like pity, mixed with the inexorable necessity of what must follow. "You are a hunter," she said, and the words fell like stones into still water. "You knew the rules of pursuit and prey. You knew the boundaries between observer and observed." Each word changed him, not slowly, not gently, but with the precision of divine purpose. His bones shifted like branches in a storm. His skin sprouted coarse hair that rustled like leaves. His face stretched forward, elongated, became something other than human. Antlers burst from his brow like sudden thorns, their weight pulling his head back in an eternal gesture of supplication. The goddess continued, her voice now a whisper in his transforming ears. "You chose to see. Now be seen. Be hunted. Be what you have hunted." The transformation was not quick, as poets sometimes claim. Every change was felt. Every shift of bone and sinew burned into his memory. His proud hunter's stance crumbled as his spine readjusted, vertebrae cracking like branches in a winter storm. His fingers, those clever hands that had strung bows and bandaged his hound's wounds, fused and hardened into hooves that could no longer grasp or create, only flee. The worst was his voice. As his throat reformed, he tried to cry out, to pray, to beg, to explain. But what emerged was the high, frightened bleat of a deer. In that sound, he heard his humanity vanish. His last human tears fell from eyes that were already changing, growing larger, shifting to the sides of his elongating face. The world blurred, then clarified into the strange split vision of prey, where every movement became a potential threat. The forest, once his realm, transformed around him. What had been familiar became alien. Every shadow concealed danger. Every rustle sparked terror. Scents assaulted him with new meaning. The sharp tang of his own fear. The green bite of leaves he could suddenly identify as food. The distant musk of predators that made his new instincts scream, run. His dogs, his beloved, loyal dogs, were the first to notice the change. Melampus, his favourite, raised his head and sniffed the air. There was a moment, just a moment, when Actaeon saw recognition flicker in those faithful eyes. But then it died, replaced by the ancient instinct of the hunt. One by one, his hounds forgot him. Their loving devotion transformed into predatory focus. Their familiar faces became masks of hunger and pursuit. Pamphagos gave the first bay, a sound Actaeon had heard 1,000 times before, had praised and rewarded. Now it froze his blood. The others joined, their voices rising in that terrible chorus that had always meant success to him as a hunter. The sound echoed off the rocks, multiplied, became a wall of noise that drove him forward in blind panic. He ran, not with human calculation, not with a hunter's strategy, but with the desperate, pure instinct of the hunted. His new body responded with a grace he had no time to appreciate. Legs that could clear fallen logs in a single bound, muscles that could power him up steep hillsides, nimble hooves that found purchase on surfaces his human feet would have slipped on. Behind him, the pack gave voice. He could identify each dog by their bark, loyal ichnobates leading them on his scent, swift Melampus closing the distance, powerful Pamphagos driving him forward with that deep, terror-inducing bay. Dogs he had raised, named, loved. Dogs who now pursued him with single-minded purpose, their love transformed to bloodlust by Artemis's terrible gift. The chase became a nightmare of fragments. The sharp crack of branches as he burst through thickets, the hot breath of dogs at his heels, the sting of thorns he had no hands to brush away, the thundering of his own hooves against earth that had once known his hunter's tread, the metallic taste of fear in a mouth not made for human words. He tried to think like a hunter, to double back, to cross water, to use the tricks he had once employed to track deer. But animal panic overwhelmed human strategy. Each time he attempted to outsmart his pursuers, raw instinct took over, driving him forward, always forward, deeper into woods that no longer offered sanctuary. The worst moments were the lucid ones, when his human mind surfaced through the animal terror, and he recognized where he was. Here was the stream where he had taught his youngest dog to swim. There was the oak where he had carved his first successful hunt mark. The cave where he had waited out storms with his hounds pressed warm against him. Each familiar place now mocked him with memories of his former life, even as he fled through them on unfamiliar legs. The sun wheeled overhead, uncaring. His strength began to fade. The new body, for all its power, was not inexhaustible. His legs trembled with exhaustion. His lungs burned. His throat was raw from breathing air that tasted of his own doom. Still the pack pursued, tireless, relentless, drawing ever closer. His legs finally failed him in a place he knew too well, the same glade where he had often rested after successful hunts, where he had shared wine and laughter with companions, where he had taught young hunters to read tracks in the soft earth. Now he stumbled, his new legs betraying him, and fell hard against ground that had once known his footsteps. The pack's triumphant chorus rose to the canopy. Through his transformed ears it sounded like victory, like celebration, like the end of a successful hunt, all the notes he had trained them to voice when they had cornered their prey. His prey, now him. In those last moments, as the dogs closed in, his consciousness flickered between human and animal like a guttering flame. One instant he was analysing the circle his hounds had formed, a perfect hunting formation he had trained them to use. The next, he was drowning in pure animal terror, his new body trembling, nostrils flaring with the scent of his own death. Melampus reached him first, beautiful, swift Melampus with his black paws, whom he had raised from a squirming pup, who had slept at the foot of his bed through winter storms. There was no recognition in those amber eyes now, only the focus of a predator. The dog's teeth found his flank, and the pain shocked a sound from him that was neither human cry nor deer's call, but something caught between, a sound that would haunt the dreams of hunters in these woods for generations to come. The others followed their pack leader, Ichnebates, who had once licked honey from his fingers, Pamphagos, who had guarded his sleep in the wilderness. Each one took their turn, tearing at the flesh of the master they had loved, driven by instinct stronger than memory or devotion. As consciousness faded, Actaeon's last human thoughts were not of anger at Artemis's punishment, nor of fear, nor even of pain. Instead, he remembered teaching each dog their name, remembered the weight of them as pups in his arms, remembered the pride in their first successful hunts. In his final moments of clarity, he understood something about divine justice, how it works through our own beloved tools, how it turns our greatest gifts into our undoing. Some say that as he died, Artemis watched from the shadows, her face as unreadable as the moon. Others claim she'd already gone, leaving only the echo of consequence to play out its final scene. But all agree that at the moment of his death, a great silence fell over the forest, the deep, heavy silence that follows the completion of something both terrible and necessary. The dogs, they say, came to themselves slowly afterward. Some howled for days, haunting the forests where they had once hunted so joyfully with their master. Others disappeared into the wild, becoming something between dog and wolf, their descendants still running through these woods with a peculiar sadness in their eyes. A few found their way back to Thebes, to lay whimpering at the feet of Actaeon's mother, trying perhaps to communicate some understanding of what they had done. The place where Actaeon fell became sacred ground, not by divine decree, but by the weight of what had happened there. Hunters would avoid it, claiming their dogs would grow restless and strange near that blood-soaked earth. Young deer would bed down there safely, as if knowing it was a sanctuary bought with the life of one who had hunted their kind. And on certain nights, when the moon is full and the air holds that same crystalline quality it had on that fateful day, they say you can still hear the echo of that last chase, the baying of phantom hounds, the thunder of spectral hooves, the sound of something running, always running, through trees that remember everything. In the years that followed, this tale would be told differently by different voices. Some would call it a warning about human pride, others a lesson about divine privacy, still others a tragedy of circumstance. But perhaps its truest meaning lies in something simpler, in the reminder that we are all, gods and mortals alike, bound by the boundaries we create and break, and that sometimes the hardest punishments come through the things and the ones we love most. The forest has grown deeper since those days. The pool where Artemis bathed has been lost to time, or perhaps only to those who would think to look for it. But the story remains, carried on evening breeze and morning mist, whispered by leaves that still tremble with the memory of hooves and hounds and transformation. And so our tale ends where it began, in a quiet forest glade, where birds murmur in the trees and a waterfall sings softly to itself over stone. But now you know what lies beneath that peace, the echo of footsteps that became hoofbeats, of devotion that became doom, of a hunter who learned too late that some sights are not meant for mortal eyes. Sleep now, dear listeners. Let the forest shadows hold you gently, but perhaps if you wake in the darkest part of night and hear distant hounds baying at the moon, remember Actaeon. Remember that the gods still walk in wild places, and remember that some boundaries once crossed can never be uncrossed. The aftermath of Actaeon's transformation reveals a more complex side of Artemis's nature than most tellings suggest. While the initial punishment was swift and absolute, ancient sources speak of her continued presence in the story's aftermath, though in ways both subtle and profound. Some versions tell of how she ensured Actaeon retained his human consciousness until the very end, not as additional cruelty, but as a form of divine accounting. He needed to understand fully and completely why this had happened. This was not mindless vengeance, but calculated instruction. Every god's punishment is also a lesson, and Artemis was, among other things, a teacher. The goddess's relationship with the dogs is particularly noteworthy. In some tellings, she appeared to them after they had torn their master apart, when their blood frenzy faded into confusion and grief. She did not comfort them, that would have undermined the lesson, but she did touch each one on the forehead, marking them with a small silver streak. This mark served two purposes. It prevented them from going mad with the memory of what they'd done, but also ensured they would never fully forget. These dogs and their descendants became known as the Moon-Touched, hunting dogs with exceptional skill, but who would sometimes stop mid-chase, haunted by a memory they couldn't quite grasp. Artemis also dealt with the aftermath in Thebes itself. When Actaeon didn't return, search parties were organised. They might have found evidence that would have raised uncomfortable questions about divine justice. But the goddess ensured the only traces they found were deer tracks and scattered arrows, enough to suggest a hunting accident but nothing more. This wasn't deception so much as divine discretion. Some truths are too dangerous for cities to know. The most interesting accounts speak of how she handled Actaeon's mother, Autonoe. Rather than let her wonder forever about her son's fate, Artemis appeared to her in a dream. She showed her everything, not just the transformation and death, but the why of it all. The dream was both gift and burden. Autonoa understood, but understanding didn't ease her grief. She left Thebes afterward, some say with Artemis's blessing, to live in the wild places where her son had died. She became something between priestess and hermit, warning hunters who strayed too close to certain pools, guiding them away from places where divine and mortal realms intersected too closely. Perhaps most significantly, Artemis made the site of Actaeon's death into what the Greeks called an aditon, a place forbidden to enter, not through barriers or threats, but through a subtle weaving of divine power that made mortals instinctively turn aside, their feet finding other paths without quite knowing why. The only exceptions were those in genuine need of sanctuary, the hunted, the desperate, the lost. For them, the glade became a haven, protected by the memory of a hunter who learned too late to recognize sacred space. The goddess herself would return to that pool, they say, but never again in quite the same way. She became more careful about her sanctuaries, more deliberate in marking boundaries between mortal and divine space. Some saw this as her becoming more stern, but others understood it as increased wisdom, a recognition that humans needed clearer signs, more obvious warnings, before they stumbled into divine territory. In the end, Artemis treated Actaeon's story not as a simple cautionary tale, but as a complex lesson about boundaries, respect, and the price of divine encounter. She ensured it would be remembered not just as a tragedy, but as a necessary teaching about the proper distance between mortal and immortal realms. The truest sign of her involvement in the aftermath might be this. Even today, thousands of years later, we still tell this story. And somewhere in the telling, we feel that ancient shiver of recognition, that sense that some boundaries still exist, some places remain sacred, and some lessons still need to be learned.